A play being predictable doesn't make it bad. The same goes for a play being unpredictable. It's not necessarily good or bad. There's a very overused Mark Twain quote that showcases the premise of this video. Although you've probably heard it as an altered version, the altered version goes, "The best swordsman does not fear the second best. He fears the worst, since there's no telling what that idiot is going to do." For some reason, people actually try to use this in an argument for why they're hard stuck in League. Oh, I'm stuck in silver because my opponents don't play in a way that makes sense. I can't track the enemy jungler because they're silver. That's extreme levels of cope, and it does not apply in League. You're not going to have a challenger player that's completely baffled by a silver player and loses to them because they can't predict what they're going to do. There's a reason that plays are predictable. It's because the more predictable plays tend to be the more optimal plays. In this video, I'm going to go over some good and bad examples for predictable plays and unpredictable plays. As said, keep your mind open. Don't think of predictable as a bad thing. A play being predictable is perfectly okay if your opponent does not have a reliable way to counter what you're doing. You've probably been on the receiving end of this before if you're a laner, or even as a jungler. As a laner, if the enemy team sets up a really good 3 or 4 man dive, it can feel unavoidable at times. You're then forced to either die under the turret or drop a large wave of minions. It doesn't matter if you saw it coming, you're still going to die to it. Another example is invading with a strong level 1 comp. It's very common for players to expect invades from champions like Nautilus or Blitzcrank, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't still invade. I talked about this more in depth in one of my recent videos on invading. I'll link in the video description if you're interested. But the idea is even if the opponents back off, you still get the advantage of being able to drop a ward. And if they don't back off, then obviously you can get the kill or at least make them use their flash. An example of a play having a downside because it's predictable would be if you use a crucial ability at the wrong time against a champion with a spell shield or that can use a dash. Make it too obvious and they're able to nullify it, then obviously you're going to have less value. Same thing goes with if you're using a dash against a champion that will follow you, such as a Warwick Q or a Zed ultimate. In those situations, you want to make it as difficult as possible, assuming that you have the ability to do so. Sometimes you don't really have the leeway given the situation, for your opponent to deny what you want. An example of using unpredictability in a good way is having the habit of going into Fog of War after shoving out a wave, or making sure to avoid showing in a lane whenever you're jungling. This allows you to still make good decisions without giving opponents more information than they need to have. Now, what I'm not saying you should do is you should invade on a champion that's really bad at invading because your opponent won't expect it. That's the bad kind of unpredictability. And you'll end up very likely losing the fight or getting nothing out of it, causing you to be behind compared to if you had done a normal full clear. Just because a play worked for you once doesn't mean it always will. You need to be realistic with plays that have high variance. Was it actually a good play, or did you just get lucky? Another example of being unpredictable in a good way can be ganking from an unexpected angle through the use of vision pockets. Fiddlesticks players tend to be particularly good at this kind of thing because they need to make sure they're not seen in order for their ultimate to work well. However, an example where unpredictability can still be bad for you is if you're throwing out abilities randomly instead of forcing your opponent to trade last hits or mana for it. It doesn't matter if you're unpredictable, it's still terrible. You're wasting resources for nothing in hopes that you'll have a miracle case. Even if your opponent in bronze, iron, gold, whatever, is unpredictable, their decisions are unpredictable because they likely are extremely suboptimal. They're not some 5-head player that's figured out exactly what you want and they're contradicting it in a good way. That's not how that goes. You have to look for the way to punish whatever mistake they're making. It may not be obvious to you how to punish it, but that doesn't mean that the counterplay doesn't exist. Remain open-minded.